Hello, I'm Susan Elliott, and today we're going to be talking to Jesse Rosen. Jesse is the president and CEO of the League of American Orchestras. He's been at the League since the late 90s. He's been president since 2008. Today, he's going to tell us a little bit about his time there as he prepares to move on to the next chapter of his very distinguished career, and for Simon Woods to take over as his successor as president of the League. Since March, are you all, how have you been coping? I mean, everybody's at home, correct? How big is the staff total?
The staff is 30, and I think that's 27 of us in New York, and then 1 in Chicago and 2 in Washington. And I would say overall, we've done reasonably well, under the circumstances. We had been telecommuting for a couple of years. I mean, not in a widespread basis like we're doing now, but it wasn't a complete shock to the system. We already had some capacity for getting our work done when people were not in the office. So that wasn't a complete, shock to us. But right. I think over time, the toll that working from home has taken, particularly on people who are caregivers, whether it's children or parents or spouses, while also doing your work, has just been extraordinary. And so we've tried to be as flexible as we can and understanding as we can, and and accommodate those situations. But that's been a real challenge.
I'll bet. And also, did you all get a PPP loan? Were you eligible for that?
Yes, we were, great. And we received one and expected to be forgiven, and it was very helpful.
That's great. That's great. You are soon to retire from your distinguished tenure at the League, and having been there since, well, you've been there since when?
1998, I think, is when I started at the League. 22.
Right. Yeah. And over time, you have worked your way into the top slot, which that's been when? Since 2008?
Yeah, so 12 years as president and CEO.
Wow. Congratulations. Very cool.
Still standing.
Which brings us to our next, my next question, which is, how are orchestras doing, aside from putting everything they own and have in their back closets online? How are they doing? How will they be doing? Where are we in the American orchestra world right now?
Well, in many respects, like the rest of our country, I mean, the hardship has been really extraordinary, and the loss of jobs, the loss of income for musicians, for staff, incredibly disruptive. And as a performing art, we are hit especially hard. And the going back to work scenario is, we come at the end of the line, and because it's a very complicated thing to figure out. We're in big, large spaces, indoors, a lot of people close together on stage. So all of that adds a degree of hardship for any performing art, or anything else for that matter that takes place indoors in large spaces. So that's been a huge challenge. And the uncertainty of knowing when, how do you plan when there is so little clarity about our response to the pandemic, and when there will in fact be a vaccine, and the extent to which we can keep it under control. I mean, these are just huge unknowns. So planning has been particularly difficult for orchestras. I think for many, the first order of business is to stay solvent and to, live to fight another day. And that has involved, in many instances, very tough decisions of really contraction, which means, again, laying off, furloughing large numbers of musicians and staff. But the premise is that this is essential in order to stay alive, so that when it is possible to come back, there are some resources available to come back. And nobody thinks this is going to be a, instant, boom, we're back to normal right away. It's going to be a slow return. And, I think in that work of, the immediate crisis and the decisions that had to be made, I think for the most part, this has been done with a spirit of shared sacrifice. This is nobody's fault. It's not bad management. It's not bad marketing. It's not greedy musicians. This is an external phenomenon of enormous magnitude. And I think everybody kind of gets that.
Mm-hmm. So do you have a sense of where this is going to go with respect to the union situation? And I mean, I have no sense of where unions are in this equation. You must be hearing something somewhere.
For the most part, negotiations between managements and their musicians are pretty local. And the dynamics in those negotiations really follow very local conditions and local circumstances. And I think like anything, there are places where the relationships are strong and healthy, and where there are results from bargaining that are durable and meaningful for both sides, and you get to a good place, and you get there in a way that preserves and strengthens relationship. And then there are places where that's not the case, where the relationships are strained, and the ability to negotiate tough situations like this is not so great. And in those situations, you have some stress and strain. So for the most part, this is really a local issue as far as unions are concerned. And I think the big work, once, getting through this immediate challenge, how are we going to stay solvent, is how do we come back, and what does that look like? And, there's some technical dimensions to that, having to do with just learning the science of aerosolization, which everyone's trying to do, including us. And, as a practical matter, how do you bring audiences and musicians together? But the bigger and kind of more interesting question is, what do we look like in a post-pandemic world? And I think that I'll just assert that when we get there, the orchestra's typical income streams, or traditional income streams of ticket revenue and philanthropy, there's no reason to think it's going to be stronger than it was before the pandemic. It's probably not even reasonable to think it's going to be the same. I mean, there's so much at play and so much changing in our world right now. So if you assume it's going to be the same, which is not a great scenario either, by the way, but more like worse, so what do you do? And, I've seen some wonderful signs of opportunity. One of them particularly around young people, and I'm thinking both of musicians and administrative staff. And when the pandemic hit, I remember as early as, maybe the third or fourth week in March, a manager in a small orchestra in the Southwest on one of our, I don't even know what we call them, where people talk to each other online. And this used to be listservs. We call it League 360 is the platform. And somebody said, this is it. This is the moment. Now we can really sit down and rebuild, reimagine. We don't have to burn it down, but let's at least start with a blank piece of paper and say, what would it look like? This is really the moment to do this. And I think there are many people in our field who are, looking at this in a similar kind of way. And to me, I think that's a wonderfully healthy phenomenon. And of course, on the musician side, we've seen a really interesting thing happen, and I might be making more of this than is appropriate, but it's not just that musicians were so quick to express their creativity and adapt and find ways to make music and connect with the public. It kind of demonstrates a really interesting lesson. I think that the person who said this best was Alberto Ibargüen at a League conference. He was the publisher of the Miami Herald, and he's now president of the Knight Foundation Miami. And he gave this big speech at the Chicago conference, and he said, don't make the mistake that we made in the newspaper business. You know, he said, we thought we were in the business of newspapers, but we weren't. The business we were in is journalism. And we can do journalism in a lot of different ways. And that distinction, you know, between your mission and how you achieve your mission is really relevant for orchestras. And I think what musicians in effect were saying, we can execute on our mission of making music, bringing it to the public in a lot of different ways. And I don't say that because I think, you know, live concerts should go away. I mean, far from it. I mean, we want those, we need those, and we're going to have them. But it opens up, I think, just a way of thinking about how we do our work. It's actually very, very expansive. And it clearly, I think, demonstrated for managements how much musicians can be part of the answer to how we reshape and reimagine our organizations in a post-pandemic world.
Of course, the other mistake that newspapers made was to put their content online for free. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there is some parallel there, because there's an awful lot of free music floating around out there that if people want to actually make a living from what they've been trained to do, they're probably going to have to start charging for it.
I think most are pretty much in that zone. I mean, we went through that at the League. You know, we made our conference free, but we can't. It's just not sustainable for us to create content and not have some income derived from it. We can't stay in business. And I think orchestras, for the most part, are looking at it that way. There are some, though, who see it, frankly, as a way of demonstrating access and keeping it free, and benefits that accrue from being accessible, having high participation, wide participation, is actually a boost to philanthropy. And so while it doesn't bring in, you know, earned revenue per se, it realizes income because of the public benefit that's created, and philanthropic individuals, institutions recognize that. So that's another interesting offshoot of how some are thinking about this.
Right. So when they've been calling in for advice and technical guidance and that sort of thing, what are some of the issues that have been surfacing from your flock of 2,000 members?
Well, you know, in the spring, of course, intense desire to understand what was happening with the various forms of relief coming out of the federal government, in particular the PPP loans. And, you know, this legislation was drafted, you know, really fast with a lot of questions unanswered. And even when they told you, you know, we're going to have the guidance in 2 weeks, and it comes out and they say, but this is really not the full story. Wait till 2 weeks from now, we'll tell you a little more. Anyhow, it's been an unending task to try to interpret and understand what's going on. And so our members, during the time of the PPP loans going out, were desperate, frankly, to understand how that process worked. And, you know, we have, and you know, because you had her on your show, an extraordinary advocacy team, and the lead person being Heather Noonan, with her partner Ned Lee, you know, working on this. And, you know, they were really in the forefront of doing that work, of reading the fine print on the rules and regulations and getting it out to members. And we brought in legal consultants who gave a number of webinars. They also gave advice. That we set up a thing where people could call the lawyers for one-on-one consultations. And so there was almost a desperation around that kind of information. And then I think there was also an intense desire simply to connect with one another. I mean, people really wanted to hear, like, how are you doing this? And it's actually, it's a wonderful thing to experience, and it really demonstrates the value, you know, what the League can provide, a platform for people to learn together and exchange information. And I think leaders have found this to be an unbelievably challenging moment. I mean, really, really tough, and it is like nothing they've had to face before. Right. So the ability, you know, to connect has been really good. One of our groups brought in a guy that we work with a lot, an organizational development guy who worked with them on resilience. And they're still talking about that time they spent and how it really kind of reframed for them how to face into what's ahead and stay healthy and stay forward looking and hopeful and all of that.
You know, you do all these wonderful seminars to train new leaders. Will the League be putting together a new one for administrators in terms of bringing along minority groups in the administrative end of things?
The conversations about the need to create, a tier of administrative talent from among people of color has been voiced very emphatically among, our own leaders. In fact, there's a big meeting of the large budget orchestras just a couple of weeks ago, and this became a main topic of conversation because they're all, every big orchestra, every group one orchestra budget's over 17 or 18 million. Everyone is led by a white person. And
Right.
they said, if anything's going to change, we've got to be looking to build that generation of leaders. And if they look at their current staffs, they don't see it for the most part. So there has to be an intervention. And I know this is on Simon's radar. And, the Sphinx program that they've begun is really terrific. And I know quite a few of the people who've been through it. They've recruited very talented people. And I think there's an opportunity there for, growing a partnership because we have a mechanism for introducing people into our field, and we know something about orchestras specifically. The Sphinx program, is more broad-based around the arts and music. So anyhow, yes, it's on our radar for sure.
That's great. I know Afa Dworkin talked about the fact that she has introduced, I think, an administrative piece in Sphinx,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which is a great idea. But the other issue is, it isn't necessarily up to music directors and administrators to populate our orchestras with more diverse players. It's really up to our players, right? Aren't they the ones who sort of make those decisions in the audition?
It's kind of a mix. I mean, at the point of audition, yes, for the most part, it is the players, but
Yeah.
Music directors and administrators can, as well as the personnel management, can hold some influence over the candidate pool, and which is part of what the National Alliance for Audition Support is all about, is growing a diverse pool of candidates. And I think one of the very hopeful signs about musicians in particular and their role in determining who's playing in the orchestras has been the leadership from the AFM and ICSOM and ROPA, the Regional Orchestra Players Association. And those are the three, really relevant groups for us. We've really benefited so much from their participation and their support. Mayor of the Snow, who's the head of ICSOM, has been encouraging that musicians take anti-bias training, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, they are making important decisions, and I think we all know that bias, it's an unconscious thing most of the time, and if you want to deal with it, you have to get some training in it. So, the leadership from the union and ICSOM and ROPA has, I think, been very much on board with promoting change in this area, and it's been a terrific partnership with them.
Great, that's great.